Recently, Welsh musician James Kennedy announced via social media that he was rejoining the Green Party after a brief fling with Labour. Musician-producer James is the singer-guitarist in alternative rock band Kashira. James has been releasing music both as a band member and solo artist since 2002 and is currently preparing to tour with his new lineup, James Kennedy and the Underdogs. I met up with James in the studio recently to welcome him back and discuss politics, music, COVID and much more. Maybe we could start with, because you recently publicly announced that you'd rejoined the Green Party. You want to expand on possibly why you came back or why you joined in the first place? Or?
Well, I've been a member for many years. You know, I politically stand in what would traditionally be a Labour sort of perspective. You know, I'm from South Wales and from a very lefty sort of background, working class family. So all of the values that I believe in would traditionally have been, you know, with the Labour Party, and they were until New Labour came along and, you know, destroyed the party and basically effectively killed the Labour Party. So I became a member of the Green Party as a result of that, basically, sort of the Tony Blair era. So I've been a member for years. And then I think when the Corbyn zeitgeist came along, it was too much of an important moment happening there. I've got to join this movement as it's happening now because it's a very real chance of getting some of the values that I believe that stand for into power. So it was purely, I left only purely just to sort of throw my weight and, you know, support behind the Corbyn campaign. And then obviously when that didn't happen, I had to sort of come crawling back with my tail between my legs to the Green Party. But it was never a matter of chasing the winning team or anything like that. It was always about the policies and, you know, what I felt was a very real chance of getting a party in power that could actually, you know, beat the Tories on that platform. And then when the Labour Party did what the Labour Party does, which is eat itself, I came back. But I'm here to stay now. I'm not going anywhere.
And you're very welcome back. You touched on policies and ideals. Would you say it's the social justice policies of the Green Party just as important to you as the climate justice policies then?
Yeah, for a long time, before I became a member, I was guilty of believing that kind of popular misconception about the Green Party, that it's very much just about the environment and green issues, and my sort of default go-to for the other stuff would have been the Labour Party. But it was only when I started looking for alternatives that I realised that the Green Party is about so much more. The environmental issue is not something that needs to be downplayed as if it's kind of, you know, second fiddle, but the Green Party is very much a traditional left-wing party in the sense that it represents, you know, the workers' rights, the housing, the social justice, you know, the National Health Service, human rights, civil liberties, you know, everything, you know, that I'm interested in, that I believe in, that actually affects ordinary, everyday, you know, working people. The only party that I can find any representation for on those issues is the Green Party, as well as obviously, you know, the environmental issue as well, which is, you know, urgent of importance.
Yeah, it's really good to hear that because it's getting better. We're getting more prominence, but yeah, getting that message across that the Green Party have this holistic view that everything is no climate justice without social justice, without racial justice. It's really crucial that we get those over. And I think where we are now, coming out of lockdown, well, hopefully the last lockdown and the whole previous 18 months of COVID, has really highlighted a lot of those social justice issues and highlighted the inequalities, you know, precarious lifestyles, precarious housing, precarious employment. In the creative sector, in the music world, how have you felt the impacts of that in what you do?
Well, personally, I have been okay. So it would be an insult for me to say that, you know, I'd struggled when I hadn't. So I'm just being honest. But I mean, I've got so many people in my peer group that really had it bad. Like some of the musicians I know who are absolute musical geniuses are now smashing their hands up on building sites or delivering takeaways or something like that, you know. Yeah, I mean, you know, some people, and I know it's not just in my industry and my peer group, it's across the board, and a lot of people have really struggled and it's hit them really hard. Our industry, I mean, you know, wasn't in a great place before COVID came along. You know, the industry was struggling anyway, you know, with venues getting closed down left, right and centre and stuff. So we, you know, there's a lot of problems that we need to deal with within the arts in general that COVID, you know, just kind of helped to get the boot in, really. But I don't think COVID was the cause of a lot of those problems.
On the whole COVID and the lockdown thing, I think one of the things that's quite ironic almost for a lot of people, it highlighted the importance of music, art, culture, when people were locked in their own homes and relying on that. So it reminded people of the importance and the value of that, something that's quite often taken for granted in a sort of free market capitalist society. While at the same time, some of the things you've touched on, the people creating this stuff, a lot of them were left on the scrap heap with no support, really. Yeah. And for me, it highlights that as a society, these things aren't valued enough. And I think that's something I'm quite proud of in the Green Party as well, that we recognise it can't always be about pure monetary value.
I was going to mention the fact that if we had a universal basic income, which is something that you guys are a big proponent of as well, that would have softened the blow during a time like we've just lived through with COVID. And if we had that, then my friends wouldn't have happened to be smashing their hands up on cold building sites and stuff like that. Because the arts, they're not valued in the right sense. I mean, we do live in this kind of economic mindset where everything is valued in the sense of its monetary value or whatever, But the arts, I mean, it's an essential part of living for all of us, and which we realised during the lockdown. It's like air, we need it. It gets us through the day. It's a soundtrack to all of our life, Not just music, but, all of the arts. It's so essential, and we're so good at it in this country as well. I think everybody loves it, and it's in everybody's life and benefits everybody's life, but there's just no support structure there for the people that create the stuff in a very difficult industry. I mean, especially in music, it's so hard to make money now. Even bands, that are on the radio, that maybe many people's favourite bands, they got no idea those guys are working in call centres, Monday to Friday, which most of them are. How much does it really mean to people? And if we can't rely on the government or the powers that be to actually, provide some kind of safety net for the people that create this essential service for all of us, then what can we do about it?
I'm glad you mentioned universal basic income, because that is a key. It's been key Green Party policy for a very, very long time, and it's very welcome to see other parties taking the idea on board and starting to explore it. And for years we'd be talking about universal basic income, and you can't afford it, we can't do that, the country can't do that. And what did we see in lockdown? We saw the country doing exactly that for some of the workers. Yeah.
Well, it's funny that they can find money when they need to bail out the bankers or whatever. And they can find money when they, when we're in times of like the pandemic and stuff like that. You can find money when they need to, And the universal basic income, how to fund that, has been well covered, hasn't it? You know what I mean? So there are easy ways to do that.
Yeah, it would have been, the country would have been so much more prepared for lockdown if that had been in place.
Completely.
So as we move out of that, because there's a lot of excited talk in some circles when the first lockdown, that this was all about doing things differently. People were commuting less, people were flying less, the air quality got slightly better, and there's a lot of optimism that things would change afterwards. We'd learned some lessons, and that's kind of evolved into a very cynical, build back better coming out of the mouths of all politicians. What do you think we need to see from elected leaders? What sort of change do they need to be implementing as we move out of this strange period?
In terms of what we can look for in the government, not much, I don't think, until we get rid of the current kind of monopoly, and I think that includes the Labour Party. They don't speak for us anymore. As somebody that's interested in the sort of things that actually affect everyday people's lives, for me, as somebody with the sort of ideals and values and interests that I've got, that's going to have to come from the Green Party.
Building on that, we've had the really exciting news this week. First Greens in government in the UK, the two Greens in Scotland, Patrick and Lorna, in the Scottish government. How much difference do you think it would make if we could replicate that in Wales, get Greens into government in Wales?
It's a massive step, man. A massive step. I mean, the more seats we can get across the board, the better, I think. Because politics is, it's a complicated, messy game, isn't it? But what I like about the Green Party is that as well as playing the parliamentary game, they're also a movement as well on the streets, which is another reason why I support the Greens, because you're very much a kind of hands-on, feet on the street sort of party as well. But ultimately, major social change has to come through the institution of government. Yeah. So the more green influence in that institution is only a good thing.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right to highlight the grassroots stuff and vital that is, and anti-fracking campaigns, all these sort of things. But again, as you identify, we need systemic change. Yeah. And that's why we're a political party. Well, we've touched on how the industry's been affected by the COVID crisis, but equally going on in pre-COVID, we've got this scenario where places like Cardiff and Newport, we're losing at an alarming rate, are losing small independent music venues. How is that impacting in real terms on people in the industry?
Massively. I mean, it's the small independent local venues where the next iconic band comes from. These bands don't fall out of the air. They cut their teeth in the small local venues, and that's where they get good. And that's how they get spotted, and that's how they climb the ladder. So without that, that's a massive part of our cultural life, essential cultural life that is being rapidly eroded. I mean, you look at Newport or Cardiff, there's like literally you can count on one hand how many actual original venues are still standing. But I mean, people listen to music, live music, every night of the week that is predominantly covers bands or something like that, so that people still have this hardwired lust for live music, but it's too easy with a covers band to make a living, but it's so much more difficult for an original band to start out without these local independent venues. And again, it's obviously there are issues like gentrification and booze taxes going up all the time, higher rents, issues with noise and stuff like that in inner city venues. There are all of those issues at play, but ultimately if people aren't going to these venues, the business can't survive just on a pure supply and demand basis. And that, as much as I hate to say it, is a real problem. Like I'm friends with a lot of club promoters and owners and stuff like that, and they've all said we're just not getting the numbers in, so they've got to start getting covers bands in, they've got to start getting tribute acts in, or DJs or club nights, just to keep the doors open. So again, I mean, we can blame a lot on the government, and we can blame a lot on the council, we can blame a lot on gentrification or the evil landlords, but if people aren't going to these places, then the places can't stay open. If we want a certain kind of society, whether it be it, musical or in terms of social justice or whatever the issue, then we can't just look upstairs. We've got to get involved ourselves as well. So if you want to keep these venues open, you've got to turn up.
I think you're spot on there, because we've all got this soft spot for independent businesses in every sector. Everyone supports their local independent business if you ask them. I had an involvement to some extent in this world when I was younger, but what still gives me cheer, even though it's become so much harder and all these obstacles, the lack of venues, the lack of income supply, still so many people coming up. It goes back to what we were saying about the importance of culture. I think people want to do this. People need this, and I think it's down to society, and you're right, it's at the top level and at the bottom level, to create a place where that can happen, to cherish that in every field, really, I think.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm share your hope on that, because I know that live music is such an essential addiction for all of us. It's never going to go away. So even if there were no venues left in a place like Cardiff, you'd see some other avenue, illegal garden raves or whatever. Something would pop up to replace it, because people need it. Sometimes we have to wait until something's gone before we realise how much we cherished it, and then fight to bring it back. And I don't think we're far away from that point at the moment. You can count how many venues on one hand, then you're near the end there. So hopefully it won't get to that point, because these guys that run these venues work really hard around the clock for hardly any money, really, to support original bands starting out, who again are playing for free. It costs money to play these gigs a lot of the time. If we really love it that much, then we need to start voting with our pocket, really, and turning up and actually supporting the venues, supporting the bands. And I think Wetherspoons are doing okay. I think that the local sports bar with the the cheap beer and everything, I think that they're going to be okay. If the cultural life of this country is important to you, then you've got to turn up and support the other side as well.
Sort of going on from culture, I mean, a lot of your work is political, informed by politics and political messages. Given how difficult it is now in the sector, does that lessen the amount of people who engage politically through music, do you think?
I think that's always been the case. I mean, you get the occasional breakthrough band that gets a major deal, like Rage Against the Machine or the Sex Pistols, or I'm sure they're a modern equivalents. But I think they're the exception, not the rule. But I don't think that necessarily means that there aren't tons of artists out there with an important message. I just don't think they get supported on the radio or in the press or in the media. But I mean, I know that there's loads out there doing it.
Talking about grassroots campaigning, activism, what are your thoughts on XR?
I support them. Yeah, I mean they supported my new song,
Okay.
which is good.
You scratch my back.
Yeah, exactly. No, I support it, man. I mean, there's always the risk with radical movements like that they're going to get things wrong sometimes, or overstep the mark sometimes. But I mean, that's the price you pay, isn't it, for the kind of action that they do, which is essential really on the causes that they're fighting for.
Yeah.
There's no clean way to fight that fight. So.
And I think that because we're a party that, at its core, we believe in non-violent civil disobedience. So as long as it stays on that side, we're very much with XR, but not of XR as a party.
I'm the same. Yeah.
It goes back to that thing that they do a really good job. They have done a really good job, along with people like Greta and the School Strike for Climate, of highlighting the issue, making people aware that this issue is on our doorstep now. But it still comes back to that thing that we've got to get people elected. The time scale with climate emergency and nature emergency, we've got to get people elected to enforce that change.
It's, again, like we said, it's not just a governmental solution. There are things that we can all do, but unfortunately, some of the big structural and institutional changes will have to come through government. Will have to come through law. I mean, do you think that the current guys are going to do that? There's not a chance. And the Labour Party are too busy fighting amongst themselves and trying to climb the greasy pole. It's not going to happen. For me, the only viable option I see for that is the Green Party. That's been a long-standing central pillar of what the Green Party has always stood for. Way before the other parties started saying it for brownie points. I know I'm talking to a Green Party, leader here, but I mean, I honestly believe that. That's why I joined the party initially, and that's why I came back as well. Was if we're going to push through these issues, obviously, the environmental issue that we're currently talking about, but all of the other essential things that this society and this country needs that actually benefit all of us, not just the 1%, the only viable option I can see is the Green Party.
Top 20 bands. If you were trying to convince someone who's cynical or not sure about voting for the Green Party or supporting the Green Party, what would be the one key policy that you'd highlight, or the one key point?
I mean, universal basic income, I think, is a really interesting one. I mean, I'm trying to purposely mention things that are outside of the environmental issue. Not to downplay that issue, but I know that for many people who are struggling with their housing or their job or their welfare, and they see the environmental issue as an abstract issue that isn't, urgent in their daily struggles. Universal basic income, I mean, how much would that completely radically transform the entire society for everybody? I can't see anybody having a problem with that.
No, you're absolutely right. It's the whole picture. People in our world know about the climate emergency, the climate crisis, but what we're talking to people about is warm housing, free public transport, healthy food, clean air, all these things. And that's what politicians don't do, and partly because you touched on earlier, they don't have the lived experience. They don't know what it's like to be down to their last £20 for the next week. They don't know what it's like to decide whether to put the heating on or feed their children. So you're absolutely, it's those issues, and people are getting that more now. And I think universal basic income has really helped with that, because it's one of those ideas we've been associated with for so long and laughed at for so long.
It seems radical, but it's really not. It shouldn't be, really. It's a society that just takes care of its own,
And we've got to go back to life and living and quality of life as well, and getting out of that growth at all costs, people working to live. So that's why we're going from universal basic income to the next one, the 4-day week for people, and going back to the importance of culture and arts and music.
And they're not these are controversial issues, really. They're quite traditional left-wing ideals, aren't they?
Well, you have to go back to a time when the idea of a weekend off was really radical. And we wouldn't have got that without trade unions.
I think the other side have had a monopoly for far too long. They've dominated the debate, and they've put too many boundaries around what the debate is. So the idea now of something like universal basic income immediately just sets alarm bells off for people, like taxation, how we're going to pay for it and stuff like that. And I think that's very much what the debate has become, kind of so kind of narrow around those issues. We forget that these are actually ideals that have been around a long time and are actually put in practice successfully in other places around the world,